Hello, everyone, and thank you so very much for joining us. My name is Anne Marie Johnson, the president of JMU Federal Dukes, an affinity chapter of the James Madison University Alumni Association. I'm also the proud graduate of the class of '87 College of Business. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's virtual event, the CEO Roundtable, Entering the Federal Market as a Small Business. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a few slides. To begin, our technology reminders. Please join the audio via your computer and put your Zoom window in full screen and fit to window. Type your questions into the Q&A box, remembering to be positive and professional as the content is visible to all. For those that are joining our affinity chapter for the first time, I want to share that the vision of JMU Federal Dukes is for JMU to be recognized as a source of talent and expertise in helping the federal government to protect and serve our nation. This vision includes alumni, faculty, and students. We want JMU to be a destination of choice, more than simply an option for students and faculty. The value Federal Dukes brings includes being a lens into the federal marketplace, helping with applied research, bringing a differentiated draw for future students, and expanding the services offered by JMU. We have several strategic priorities. We are creating a virtuous circle that benefits our alumni, faculty, students, and our nation. Our priorities include increasing awareness of the federal government mission, which hires all majors, preparing future employees, and building the pathways that benefit all. In addition to me, we have three other volunteer leaders on our executive committee. Mike Battle, Tim Hartman, and David Grant are all co-founders. We also have 5 remarkable committee leads. Chris Richards and John Carr lead our Alumni Engagement Committee. Lisa Munt leads our Communications Committee. Matt Brown leads the University Engagement Committee. And Kevin Plexico leads Programming and Events. And now on to our program. Starting a successful company requires navigation of challenges and opportunities. Today, we are excited to have 2 JMU Double Dukes and a Maryland Terp to talk with us. Each of them are successful CEOs of firms serving the federal government. They will share their expertise on what to expect in the federal market and how to overcome common obstacles. To lead that discussion, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce my friend, colleague, and fellow Duke, class of '92, Kevin Plexico. Kevin is the Senior Vice President of Information Solutions at Deltek. Kevin brings over 20 years of research operations and product management for Deltek, a respected source of market intelligence for the U.S. public sector. Before I turn it over to Kevin, I'd like to extend a hearty welcome. Good afternoon, Kevin.
Thanks, Anne Marie, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I think we have a packed, good content agenda for you with some leaders who have sort of been there and done that in the government contracting space that have either stood up or are managing small businesses that have been very successful in the government contracting space. And I think as many of you who are maybe associated with the market, one of the things you realize is how frothy and vibrant the market is in terms of the dollars spent, but it also has some rather unique requirements, compliance requirements, and kind of ins and outs of how to do business in the government market the government way. So I think we've got a lot of good content today. What I'd like to do is maybe just take a moment to briefly introduce our panel, and then have them take a moment to take you through their backgrounds, their company, and what led them to creating a company or managing a company in this space. So we have with us Catherine Freeland, who's the CEO of ATEC, a IT professional services company. We have Mike Battle, President and CEO of BRMI, also an IT services company, and Matt Brown, CEO and co-founder of ShorePoint. So pleased to have these incredibly talented and skilled people with us today to share their experiences. And panel, welcome. Maybe Catherine, I could start with you. If you could just maybe take a couple minutes to share a little bit about your background and your company, and also what led you to get into this particular market.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and good morning. Well, I'm sorry, good afternoon to everybody who's joining today virtually. As Kevin said, I'm Kathy Freeland. I am the CEO of a company called ATEC, located in Northern Virginia. by way of background, from Birmingham, Alabama, went to the University of Alabama, Birmingham, the youngest of five. And so been in this GovCon space now for almost 38 years, having graduated from the University of Alabama, Birmingham, moved to this area 5 days after I married my husband, and started immediately in GovCon as a contractor. Because my degree at UAB was in finance, I immediately went into the budget and finance area within federal government contracting. So I learned everything about how the government purchased all of the things that it purchases, everything from pens and pencils to aircraft carriers and battleships in the process. And so that was how I cut my teeth in the government contracting space. How I got involved in being an entrepreneur, however, took a little bit of a different twist. It was not my intent to be an entrepreneur. My father had a 6th grade education and my mom did finish high school, but they insisted that all of us get a good education, get a great job. I worked there for about 40 years, marry yourself a great man and live life happily ever after. However, that was not the path that my career took. After going back to school to get my master's degree from the University of Maryland, I was in management, ready for management, and that position, even though it was available, it wasn't offered to me. And that was really the catalyst that plunged me into becoming an entrepreneur, not knowing what entrepreneurship was at the time, nor what small business ownership meant at the time, having come from a very small town in Alabama. But because I understood how the federal government did work, how it did spend its dollars, my husband, who is entrepreneurial, really did encourage me to start my own business after that. And so it took a few years to kind of get that all squared away, but ultimately we did plunge out into the deep, as I call it, into the federal government contracting space with our first contract that was about $25,000, and that's a whole nother story. But ultimately we were able to grow that company in the 8A program until such time as when we graduated from the program, we exited it with 98% of our business being non-8A, and was able to sell that company in 2003 to a publicly traded company that was looking to enter the federal space, and we became their platform company. Following that, a 3-year contract with them to stay on board, a 4-year non-compete after that, and ultimately came back into the space having acquired ATAC as part of an M&A relationship, as well as having a equity partner come in along with me to acquire ATAC. And ATAC as an organization, we're 26 years old. I've been at the helm since 2010, and we are supporting federal agencies predominantly in the federal civilian domain, Department of Homeland Security, NIH, FDA, Department of Commerce, Department of Justice, predominantly in application software development, as well as in micromolecular biology, with 13 employees in 13 cities across the United States, about 332 FTEs today, and continuing to look to grow. So that's my story very quickly, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And I was just actually down in your neck of the woods in Alabama, touring Alabama with my daughter. She's looking at some Southern schools as she goes into her senior year next year.
All right,
Great. Well, thank you.
Be on the list.
Mike Battle, you're up next. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you down the path of creating your company in the government market.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kevin. And I will tell you, you disappoint me that you allowed her to get past Harrisonburg on her journey to look at schools. We'll talk about that later.
That was against my own will, I will say that.
So I started out with an interesting experience going to a school by the name of James Madison University to play football. Learned a lot through that process. Was recruited by a number of schools, but JMU sold me on being a part of that culture, and decided after I finished my playing days that I'd stay there and go to graduate school, because I wanted to know what it felt like to sit on the hill and look at a game, what all of the fun was. And I wanted to get that experience, and decided to stick around and work over at JM's Pub and Deli when it first opened, and got my MBA from JMU on campus. Spent the majority share of my 40-year career, hate to say that, I got out in '84 and went straight to IBM. spent time over that period working for about 6 organizations, all commercial. Never had the real experience of dealing with the federal government at the outset of my career. And I've done everything from managing people to being a quota carrying salesman. And then somewhere along the line, I got an opportunity to work as a team lead on what was called the Quicksilver program, helping to define the lines of business in the federal government. I said, this ought to be easy. This, us commercial guys, we kind of make these decisions and move on relatively quickly. So I got a chance to interact with a number of people at senior levels across a variety of different agencies in the federal government, and found out that the federal government was really challenged. They really struggled with the notion of moving from strategy to execution, which is something in the commercial space you didn't really have as an issue because the motivation was clear. It was business solvency. In the federal space, there are a lot of other motivations for why people make decisions. So I looked at that and said, you know what, there's an interesting opportunity to start a firm focused on bridging that gap. And so in 2004, I went to my existing company, it was called HPTI, and told those folks I wanted to go out and start my own firm. I'm getting, a little long in the tooth, and if I don't do it, I'll regret it. They finally said, okay, fine, we'll help you. You'll get a subcontract with us. And they gave me the opportunity to go out and start my own firm, which was by myself. And that was the start of BRMI. Our first contract was with the new Department of Homeland Security. It was me by myself, and we've grown this company from that standpoint, from dealing with what we call friend of government professional services work to an IT services firm. We've acquired 2 companies during that time frame. We've seen the ups and downs and struggles of being what I call an awkward teenager, not a large company, but not qualifying as small anymore. It has been an interesting experience, and now we're focused on the challenges of public health technology. The National Cancer Institute is one of our largest clients. We're also, with that long heritage in the DHS and DOJ space, continuing to do work there, as well as other civilian agencies in the regulated financial space with PBGC, Department of Treasury, a few other organizations along those lines. So it has been an interesting ride. I've enjoyed every bit of it, and go Dukes.
Thank you, Mike. And thankfully, the football team has gotten a lot better since we were there, right?
Oh, no. Yes, it has gotten a lot better, I have to admit.
And bigger. And it sounds like you and Catherine have a fair amount in common with the work in the health field. I know that her company does a fair amount in that space as well.
Sure.
Matt, how about you, Matt? Thanks for joining us today. Matt Brown, CEO and co-founder at ShorePoint.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Like Mike, my journey began at JMU. I'm a '97 graduate. I also played football there. I probably was not as heavily recruited as Mike was, but I did enjoy my time there. When I graduated college, I actually interned with a company my junior year that was in the federal government space. They actually had a commercial IT services practice and a federal government services practice called BIS, and we were small. We were 15 employees at the time, so I got to kind of get in at the beginning of a growing company. And when I graduated college, I ended up going there to work, and so I was an account manager for enterprise IT at the Pentagon, working in their government group. That company sold in 1999, and I went to work for Who Bought Us, a company out of Colorado in the commercial IT space. My boss at the time was thinking about starting another company in 2000 and asked me if I wanted to join him. And I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity and not have any strings attached in terms of, 3 years out of college. I didn't have any broad plan. So I kind of lucked my way into a way to start a company with someone that I trusted and respected. And we started a company called Knowledge Consulting Group, KCG, in 2000. That company was focused on cybersecurity services in the federal space. And it was 4 of us that started the company. Over the course of the next 15 years or so, we grew it from that to about 250 employees. Like Mike, also, we worked heavily in DHS. We did a lot of the cybersecurity services work for a number of the components within DHS, TSA, ICE, DHS headquarters, and then also supported a number of financial services organizations, all in the cyber services arena. So we did a lot of vulnerability assessment work, pen testing, security compliance, security operations, things of that nature. That company sold in 2015 to Mantech. We had graduated from being small to large, so I kind of saw that transition. And then we grew for a couple more years and then decided that the best path for us was to combine with a larger IT integrator. So we sold to Mantech, and then I ran defensive cyber for Mantech for 2 years, and learned all about kind of how a big company works, how a public company works, how they have to report financials, how they have different ways of management of accounts and things of that nature. So it's an eye-opening learning experience for me, going from a small to a large, and seeing kind of how that company works. About that same time, 2017, I got the itch to kind of get back to the entrepreneurial spirit, and always when we started KCG, I kind of wanted to learn how to grow a company and build a company, and then see if I could do that on my own. And so, in 2017, I was getting that itch, and I wrote a business plan on the way to the RSA Security Conference, shared it with a few folks that I would like to have join me in this venture. And we started ShorePoint in 2017, again, to focus on cyber services, learn some of what we learned from KCG, and then apply it, and hopefully be as successful, or if not more, or grow faster and support customers. One of the things I got away from at Mantech was kind of getting more and more further away from customers and actually solving problems, which is what I liked. And so starting a company got me back into interacting with customers, interacting with clients, kind of building solutions around some of the problems they have, especially now that we're moving more toward kind of modernized applications and modernized infrastructures. So fast forward to today, we're just over 100 employees, 6 years in. Our key customers are, again, DHS. We support Department of Education, FDIC, USAID, FBI, a number of key missions for the federal government, all in the areas of digital transformation, securing digital transformation, and security operations. And then we have a large kind of zero trust practice that we're proud of. So I went back to school and got my master's degree at JMU as well in 2007 to kind of give me some more credentials in my resume as we moved from being a small company to a large. And so, excited to share what my experience has been with starting a company and working in the federal space as we talk on this panel.
Thanks, Matt. I'm just realizing now the connection to KCG. I was grateful to have Marianne Hirsch on our board of directors at Input before we sold to Deltek back in 2010, which is how I ended up at Deltek. So good connection there.
She spoke very highly of you, Kevin.
So I'm going to bounce out of the screen share mode since we're going to move into the conversation. And I thought I'd start with a question that sort of is in line with one of the questions that were submitted. I've often heard it described that the first federal contract that you win is by far the most expensive contract you'll ever win. I guess I'd be interested in hearing from each of you what went into that first contract win. Like, what was the learning and the process that finally got you that first sort of leg in the door, or foot in the door with the government agency? And I'll just maybe start with you, Catherine, if you don't mind.
Sure, thank you. Well, my first contract win was back in the day, as I would say, back in the early 90s when we first started the first company. And it was a $25,000 purchase order. That tells you how far back I'm going a little bit. And just to get that one small order took a lot. And that was from a customer that I had already previously supported prior to being turned down for the manager position that I felt I had to serve. And so it took him some convincing that even as a startup company that we had the skill set that we needed in order to do this job. And really it wasn't a hard thing to do. It was really a management study on the study of how their computer systems worked at that time. Now we were a new IT company. My husband was a BDer and I did everything else while we also had full-time jobs. And so we were able to pull together this study that the customer had asked us to produce and showed him a sample of it prior to him actually awarding the contract to us. So it took a little bit of time to convince him that this new startup company could actually do this and then some, because at the time it was really just me and my husband, Greg. We had a lot of people who we knew as far as IT folk who could do other work, but they weren't employees of ours. So we had to convince him that we could do this. And ultimately we did. He did award the 25K purchase order. It was small in nature, but it was something that we really needed to be able to demonstrate that we could do it. And that's really what we began to use as our past performance when we started looking at other things in that similar area, until we were able to really bring other people within our organization, meaning I promised the world, and with the hope that they would join our company to be those technical SMEs that we needed in order to really pursue something else and pursue something larger. Because I knew budget, I knew how the government worked. From the budgeting standpoint, I knew IT was going to be the way that they were leaning into during that time. And that really was then the catalyst to help us win our first IT contract with a lot of hard work, a lot of BD, a lot of snoozing, a lot of visiting. This was before internet was popular. We really had to go down to the agencies and pound pavement and really meet and greet people as much as we could in order to position ourselves for another sizable win. And when I say sizable, the next contract was about $150,000. So we didn't get into the millions of dollars until much, much later in the maturation of our company. And that in and of itself took a lot. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about what some of the steps are that we had to take in order to achieve that first $1 million bid as well.
So quick follow-up question on that $25,000 purchase. Was that purchased under simplified acquisition? Did you have to compete or submit a formal proposal, or was that just a simplified acquisition purchase that was just given directly to you?
Yeah, it was and I'm not sure they were calling it simplified acquisition back then, but that's typically what it was. We didn't have to compete for it. It was within his threshold of authority to award the purchase order. And so he awarded directly to us, based upon, what I've mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so it was the relationship that was really the key for getting that contract. Great,
absolutely,
thanks.
it was. Absolutely, it was.
Mike, how about yours?
Well, not very dissimilar from what Catherine just spoke about. It was really all about relationship. As I mentioned before, I was working for a company called HPTI and made this decision that I was going to go out and convince them, hey, listen, I really want to do this with you. I want to apply for 8A certification so I could be an asset to HPTI going forward as a partner. What do you think about doing this together? And finally, after about a year of saying no, they finally said, okay. And they said, if you can go down to the Department of Homeland Security and convince our prime contractor, SAIC, that they need you, we will give you a subcontract, a second tier subcontract. So I went down to DHS, convinced Dr. Carl Kropp at SAIC that he could use my skill set. And it was really about business analysis and communication to help bring all of these agencies together, have them be able to see the value of enterprise architecture. So I went down there with that whole message. He said, okay, great, we'll bring you on board. Now, I will tell you, number one, my salary was cut in half. Number two, I had no benefits. I had to get rid of my car and drive an old Ford F-150 pickup truck down to Vermont Avenue every day. It was difficult. My wife called the insurance I had to pay, it was called Mega Life. She called it Mega Death because it didn't cover anything. It was part of that transition that created that first contract. From that, I was able to use relationships, engagement, as Catherine said, feet on the street, loving the customer, showing them what I could do, that they eventually saw that at USCIS. And they brought me over there to fundamentally get my first real contract, which was not a second tier sub, a first tier sub. So it went on like that for a while, but that was how we got started as a company. It was truly bootstrapping from the ground up.
Yeah, so I often hear the first step for a business to becoming a prime contractor is starting as a subcontractor and working under a company that sort of has some relationship. Would you say in your case, the relationship with, I'm sorry, was it HPTI that you said? Can't remember the company.
With my company.
Yeah, that was the key for you to get that start. Is that about right?
That it was having a relationship with my employer that allowed me, treating that relationship with respect, that allowed them to feel comfortable supporting me. But more importantly, it was selling to SAIC what skill set, what value I could bring. And that's what ended up fundamentally forcing HPTI to sign me up so that I could help SAIC their prime. It was a heady time back then, because those of you who know DHS back in the early days, it was Lord of the Flies. Contractors could do everything the feds were doing. So there were lots of opportunities there, but that's how we got to getting on the ground.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. And Matt, how about you? Yours is probably the most recent, I guess.
Yeah, very similar. I was just trying to think, I've had two companies that started, and both of our first kind of contracted deals kind of worked out the same way, was through relationships. I think one of the things that Mike hit on it, as to Catherine, that I would just kind of reiterate is the value of having the right relationships with people that respect you and that respect your knowledge and are willing to kind of give you a shot and leverage that as much as you can when you get started. At both companies, our first work were advisory deals that were about less than $50,000, and they were simply kind of consulting deals for a larger prime contract that a friendly had that said, all right, I'll give you this piece, and if you can kind of work on it and show some value, almost like I'll throw you a bone if you can kind of deliver on it. So you were first forced to deliver while you're trying to stand up the company in the same breath. For me, fortunately, I had a couple partners, and we were able to kind of share the workload in terms of starting the company and kind of building the operations and the foundation and whatnot. And I could focus on delivery of actually what the customer was asking us to do. But it is still the same. It's kind of leveraging the relationships and the network that you build, and the value that provides to you is tremendous in getting started. Every small business, I think, starts as a sub. You have to do subcontract work for so long to build up your past performance, to get more employees, to get referenceable work that you can demonstrate your capabilities. It's not just you, but you prove that you can bring in the right people and scale. And that all is reliant on someone doing you a favor, or someone saying, I trust you to do this work for me to get you started.
Yeah, great. So before we maybe jump into the conversation, I did want to just remind the audience, if you do have questions, I've got a few questions here that I'm going to take the team through, but if you do have questions, please go ahead and post them in the Q&A window so that we can take them up as we get towards the later part of the program. We'll be taking some audience participation, so to speak. I guess to pull the thread further, you all, since that first contract, have obviously built businesses that are much more sizable. And with government contracts, it usually comes with a fair amount of strings attached. They want you to have certain compliance capabilities relative to your HR practices, your project management processes, your financial operations. What was the process like in that maturity from a 1 or 2 person operation doing a less than $100,000 work order to getting to the point where you're starting to build out the sort of compliance capabilities to be able to bid on a multi-million-dollar contract or RFP? And I don't really want to necessarily take this around to everybody, but maybe anybody wants to jump in, we can just kind of turn this into conversation at this point.
Sure. Well, I'll start out, and Catherine has done this a few more times than I have, so she really understands this in some detail. But I'll take this point of view. Number one, you're not an expert in any of this. On all this back office administrative stuff, you're not an expert at it. What we had to do, well, the biggest challenge when you first get started is the fact that you're trying to manage delivery to the customer, your administrative infrastructure, and trying to figure out how to make sure you get paid. And all of this is predicated on your ability to be able to engage and grow the business beyond just the task that you're responsible for. So it's really challenging. And what I found early on was get third-party support. Use agents, individuals, subject matter experts. From an accounting standpoint, they've got third-party assets that help you do that. From a compliance, contracts perspective, all of these functions are all provided third-party. I had to use those so that I could focus more on that customer relationship and delivery, so that I could have more business for those folks to support rather than less. So that's the way I went about trying to deal with that challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add, I was fortunate. We, at our first company, BIS, we had somebody that grew into a finance and administration role that was awesome. I mean, total rock star. And she has worked with us at KCG and also as she was one of the first people I brought on board at ShorePoint to help us build out the finance, contracts, administration piece of the company. So again, we could kind of focus on delivery and know that she would do all the right things from a compliance and administration and contracting perspective. It's a lot easier now than it was back in 2000. A lot of the cloud applications now allow you to not have to stand up an entire IT infrastructure, for instance. You can outsource, email and HR and payroll and things of that nature that you couldn't do as well back in 2000 when we started. So I think the modernized applications are a lot bit more beneficial to folks that are starting a business now. You can kind of build out a lot of things quickly and cheaply on a per user cost than you couldn't before. But I think in terms of organically, as you start to look at prime contracts, to your point, they do have requirements on them. One of the big ones for us was insurance. Like some of the contracts would say you have to have $2 million in E&O insurance or whatever it would be, maybe more. They had payment terms of net 45 or net 60. As a small business, you try to negotiate all those things down, right? Like I'd like net 15 or net 30. And I don't have $3 million of insurance because I don't, it's a $100,000 contract. So could I get $1 million of insurance or something lower so that you can kind of stair step your way up to the requirements that you need to have? So I think some of that stuff just comes organically as you grow, and you're forced to address things as you go after bigger and bigger items, contracts.
Yeah. Okay. Catherine, anything to add? Just give you a chance, just in case you want to jump in.
Not really. I think for many of our audience members may be startups, and they may be saying, well, how do I get to that point, right? Because maybe I don't have the capital yet to put into the back office infrastructure and all of that. And a lot of times, and I know for me, access to capital was the hardest thing in order to fund anything. But nowadays, I think there's a little bit more access, potentially, I hope, to be able to fund some of the back office functions that we all need as we grow our companies. But in the beginning, we were doing it all. We were HR, we were accounting, we were doing everything, calling in favors from friends who understood a lot of that before we could even pay anybody to do anything. But to the point once we start growing, absolutely, we have to invest in the infrastructure, all the things that Mike and Matt have already spoken about, and do it strategically. Do it as you grow. You don't need a Grant Thornton to do your books, when you're a small company, right? Grow, scale as you scale would be the advice that I would add.
And all of you have built businesses that are successful and fairly good sized at this point. I suspect it wasn't like a linear kind of continuous path from the beginning to get there. What would you say maybe are some of the significant challenges or obstacles or setbacks that you had? And how did you overcome them? Were there any like surprises around a certain contract or some stumbling block that you ran into that was really a setback you had to kind of figure out?
I'll start. I mean, you're right, Kevin. It is not linear. If it was, I think all of us would be well above where we are today. It's ebb and flows, and the federal government is a great place to do business, but it's very competitive to do it in this space as well. And so as we ebbed and flowed, in and out, one size, the next size, and what have you, it became even more challenging, I think, in the beginning stages of it, my first company, because I think I had 3 strikes against me going in, or maybe 4. One, I was female, I was minority, I had no money, and I was entering the technology space that was very male dominated. And so how to overcome those challenges were the things that we had to work on diligently to be able to win, anything of any major size. And so going back to relationships, going back to networking, going back to pounding pavement, all the things that really needed to happen to overcome those challenges, one challenge at a time. And then you add into that all the other personal things you have going on too while you're trying to grow the business at the same time. So I oftentimes say growing a business is not for the faint of heart because you get a lot of no's along the way. But it only takes that one yes to kind of get us going. And those setbacks ultimately do turn into, as we oftentimes say, comebacks.
Yeah. So I think there's some interesting areas where you have to be prepared to make some significant investment and deal with it. First of all, when I first started bringing people into the organization, started to grow just a little bit. I need a body or 2 here or there. It was bringing in like 1099s. You really couldn't afford to give a person a W-2 salary and benefits and all of that. So you found 1099s to come in to support you. Great. But then you have that moment where you start to bring in W-2s, and that means you have to have all of that, a bit of that infrastructure in place, insurance, benefits, et cetera, for employees. So that first clip level is when you start building W-2 workforce. Then the next one for me was when we got to 50 employees and we had to be compliant with Department of Labor regulations. So that meant a whole bunch more paperwork and things that we had to account for, make sure we had an accountant to support that, and all of the audits and things like that that were necessary. That was the next significant step function in terms of the amount of investment and things that we had to make as an organization. When you look at it, you brought up this other thing in terms of challenges. Yeah, we had a significant, what I call extinction level event. It was the point where we were working with the USCIS, and we had a customer who had no idea anything about enterprise architecture, but she was responsible for it. And she didn't like the way that we were doing what we were doing, even though it was exactly what was needed. And she was ready to throw us out. And if she had thrown us out, that would have been the end of the company. That was our only contract. And it took a lot of courage to stand up and go above her head to the deputy CIO and say, she doesn't know what she's doing. We're at risk. My team's going to quit if we have to put up with this much longer. I can't help you. Well, the CIO heard this and then eventually got rid of her and kept us on board. And I have maintained a friendship with that deputy CIO ever since. That was an extinction level event. And the deputy CIO who had the courage to listen to us instead of the Fed is what just retired as the deputy CIO for the entire federal government. I just had lunch with her yesterday, Maria wrote. You're gonna have those moments where it's going to take courage and you're going to have significant risk and you need to fight through that. You need to take those risks. So those were the big step functions and issues that we had along that growth path, that early growth path from 1 to 100.
That will make a dear friend indeed.
Yes, it did.
Matt, anything to add on your end?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think the challenges, I would say, COVID impacted us with ShorePoint for sure, because every customer handled it differently, and we were a couple years in at the time, so just having to communicate with each employee and with each customer about kind of how they were handling the situation, that was a challenge. I think other challenges are kind of Mike touched on a little bit, like hiring the right people, or if you're going to miss, you're going to swing and miss on a couple. You just hope you don't swing and miss on key positions of personnel that you give kind of leadership responsibilities to. And I think that is a challenge. And the last one is partnerships. The people that you go to business with, the companies you go to business with, the ones that are the best are the ones you trust and have worked with them through kind of proposal and delivery, and know that what you say you're going to do during capture is what is going to happen under operations. We've had a couple where that hasn't been the case, and you have to kind of learn those lessons from them along the way. And so, kind of reducing the go-to-market with kind of trusted teammates and friends is certainly important.
Great. Yeah. I'm going to pick up next on a question submitted by Alan Balutis, former CIO, also a friend and colleague of mine from the past. There's been a lot of changes in this market. I remember when I first joined Input following my graduation from James Madison in '92, the top contracts were, single award to a systems integrator who would do everything soup to nuts. And when they won the work, they won the work. And you fast forward to today, and we have this environment where there's sort of these big platform contracts that are awarded to a host of companies. But when you win, you don't really win anything except the right to bid on the work that comes out under the task order opportunities that sort of follow. What are the changes that you all have seen, or maybe you've seen the same changes? Maybe the bigger question is, how has that affected how you engage in the market from a business development point of view? In a lot of cases, the RFP that you're getting ready to submit a response to doesn't actually have a specific piece of work associated with it. It's more the right to bid on the things that come out later. And how has that kind of changed the mentality that you have when you're pursuing these kind of opportunities?
Well, thank you for that question. Alan has been around a long time, so I'm sure he's seen a lot from when I first met him many, many years ago. But it's almost very similar even today. You have GWACs and DWACs and IDIQs and all of that. And those are licenses to hunt. That's pretty much what they are. And there's no guarantee that you will win anything on those contracts. But without having the vehicles, you also can't play in the environments, where you want to play. And I'll just use a prime example, which many of us have been following, COSP 3 and 4, right? Without the vehicle, it's very difficult to play in the venues where the customers are. They prefer certain vehicles for them to put their requirements against. So without having those vehicles, it does make doing business a little bit more challenging, because we're also seeing obviously trying to make certain that we're, diversifying your portfolio of contract vehicles, and just whether it's single award vehicles or multiple award vehicles, agency-wide vehicles, specific agency vehicles, they all are licenses to hunt. And so I think it does challenge our, I would say, our business development organizations to really be laser focused on what those things are that we feel that we can pursue and be put in a position where we feel that we can be competitive and win. And then being able to really just have a pipeline that is represents really those agencies where we feel like we want to do business, and then being sure that we have the things that we need around contract vehicles and the like to be able to do business in those spaces. And when we don't have those, then that's where everybody's, both Matt, Mike, and Mike have talked about partnering and where that comes into play. So when we don't have, maybe one of our partners will have. And so making certain that the business development teams and all of us who do BD, and all of us are business developers, whether we like it or not. That's really how we begin to increase our footprint, within the spaces as things change so significantly, as the government changes, as the political environment changes, all those, as technology changes frequently. How do we stay and keep up with the things that the government's leaning into? And having some of these vehicles is one way that we're doing it.
Yeah, and I'll add in. I mean, I think there certainly a lot has changed, right? The movement to best-in-class vehicles has changed. The number of set-asides and the different types of set-aside opportunities that are out there, and the goals of organizations, I think, has changed the way acquisitions happen. But there are a number of things that are kind of universal that are necessary as a small business that I think would be interesting for the folks that are looking to kind of go after, or maybe be an entrepreneur or do something on their own. And those are, you have to know what you do, right? What you do and what you do well. Like, we are a cyber services company. We're not going to go after things that are not cyber services related. There's an application development contract, that's not for us. If it's, something that has the 90% of the scope is cyber services, we're going to target that, and we're going to spend, time and effort to go capture that opportunity. So kind of knowing what your swim lanes are and what you will and won't go after, and being able to say no to the ones that distract you, I think is super important. Number two, the customers that you're going after, I think, is important to know. So if like we know FedCiv fairly well, we don't know DoD Intel that well, and it's a different language in some capacity. So, knowing kind of what your target set of opportunities are and target customers are, kind of enable you to focus on what those things are. When you're building a proposal, why do you differentiate yourselves? Like, do you actually have an approach to what you're doing, or are you just kind of a me too with the requirements to go after it? I think that's super important to to make sure that you figure out and spend some time kind of building what are the customer's problems and what are the solutions that I could take to them that would be compelling for them to look at us as a viable partner in what they're trying to accomplish. I think that is still super important. There are, and the customers that you do target, know how they acquire services, or do they use the best-in-class vehicles? Do they use GSA Schedule? Do they use something else? I think that will enable you to focus your time and effort on, is it worth it for me to go after C4, this customer that I'm targeting doesn't ever use it? Or would I spend more time, looking at things that come out on GSA Schedule, because that's how they typically acquire? You always have to have a balance between funded task orders and contracts that there's work, and the kind of, hunting license BPAs and best-in-class vehicles that you go after. So you have a broad mix of contracts. But I think it's super important that you spend the time to kind of know who you are, what you want to do, and where you want to do it. That will enable you to kind of have a little bit more focus on being able to say yes or no to opportunities and stay focused.
Yeah, Matt, that's a great point. I, having gone through, and Catherine mentioned it, CIOSP4, this best-in-class vehicle hunt that everybody is doing, I've sort of noticed a few things. For starters, because of the focus on best-in-class vehicles, every one of these has become too big to succeed. Not too big to fail, too big to succeed. Everybody knows they have to have it. And as a result, you get, right now we're sitting at 122 protests after having been awarded this vehicle. We were winners of Alliant 2 small business. It was protested into oblivion. They had to kill it. My concern is that the customer community out there is figuring out, I can't wait for these. And there seems to be a bit more of a reliance or interest in moving more towards BPAs again. And I can see that happening in certain instances, particularly in public health research and a few other places. But for somebody who's getting started with the firm, the idea of chasing a customer relationship and a mission-focused platform like a BPA with a customer, or being on a team with a company that is servicing that customer in a BPA, a broad, what does a BPA stand for? I just forgot.
Purchasing agreement.
Blanket purchasing agreement.
Purchasing
Right.
agreement, thank you. That kind of platform is going to get you closer to money and closer to a long-term relationship than trying to spend a lot of time finding your way onto one of these BICs. I really have some concerns about whether the BICs are going to continue down this path, especially if it takes forever to get CIOSP4 out. Then you got Polaris and you've got Oasis Plus. They're all the same methodology. They're all very large, and everybody's going to go after them and going to protest if they don't win. So it's going to be interesting.
Just to add on to that thought, Mike, because I think it's excellent. A customer relationship is not any good to you if they can't get to you. So you do have to kind of align customer and contract to figure out how, if you do have a positive relationship or a customer that wants your services for X, Y, or Z, you need to also have a plan for how they're going to get that. That may be a BPA, that may be a GSA schedule. In my mind, there's two barriers to entry into our business. One is a facility clearance, and two is GSA schedule. You kind of have to have those two things when you start the company. Well, not right when you start the company, but soon thereafter, to be able to get work, because at least you have access, and then you kind of have a place that people can go if they need cleared work.
You sort of have demonstrated that you can comply just by getting a GSA schedule. In a lot of respects, it gives agencies just a little comfort that you've got a little bit of investment in the game of complying with the rules that they're going to ask you to when you win a contract. I guess related to that, obviously the environment the last 3-4 years has been extremely unusual, with COVID sending employees and contractors for the most part working from home. We've also had an administration change that took place at the same time that's brought in some new requirements around climate change and sort of impact on the environment reporting for companies of certain size. Focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, with a press on doing more business with small disadvantaged businesses. How are you seeing the landscape change? Like, we'll just say really recently, has it gotten easier? Has it gotten harder? Are your people on site again? Are they still working remote? Like, what's the environment that you all see today compared to where it was maybe just a couple of years ago? And how do these changes really affect the day-to-day, or is it pretty much, you're just kind of dealing with the obstacles and going about your business?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I think most of our folks are still remote. We have a couple customers that either they have to be on site or they're moving back towards on site, but for the most part, we're still remote. I think the biggest thing for us, and I would say that's changed, is employees want more from the company than they wanted 10 years ago. I mean, before, I think the employers had a lot of the power in terms of bringing people in. You had a job, they needed work, and you could kind of dictate the terms to them. Now, I think, employees, certainly past COVID, have a lot more options of where they can work, what they can do, the company they want to work for. And a lot of those are culture related. Like, they want to be a part of a company that contributes to the community. They want to be a part of a company that helps their mental health. They want to be a part of a company that supports DEI initiatives. They want to, there's a much more of a demand on the employee side, I think, of their employer, which I think is very good and very positive. And I think the companies that are succeeding are ones that put a focus to that and kind of not just talk about it, but be about it. Like you can demonstrate things that they've done in this space. So for me, I think that's the biggest change over the last couple of years is not necessarily administration related, just I think kind of the nature of the workforce has changed, and they're much more aware of who they work for and what they do.
Yeah. Go ahead, Catherine.
No, I was gonna ditto what Matt was saying. I think even though we're all still kind of navigating this, it's our new normal, and I'll call it that. We continue to navigate that daily. Things, have returned to some sense of normalcy from people traveling and things of that nature. From a staffing perspective, I think all of us are probably hearing when we're recruiting for open positions, one of the first questions that's asked, and that is this remote? How many days can I work remote? We never heard that, previously before COVID, but now it's a question that we have to be prepared to answer. And even though 50% of our staff never went home when COVID happened because they're scientists, so they were there on the front lines also helping to test for COVID. So they never went home, so they don't know what it means to do that. But the other part of the house, right now we're in a hybrid status, right? There's no mandate to return to our corporate office, and even our customers have not 100% returned to their offices either. So we do have a group of staff that are going in 1 day a week or something like that, but it's not the norm across the board. And so I would definitely say that's one of the areas that have really impacted as far as COVID is concerned. In addition to what we're seeing is there's we oftentimes say in-house that employees or candidates are perishable, meaning they do have multiple options available to them when they're applying for jobs, and we can't take a long time, to make decisions, and they're asking for more, oftentimes more beyond the labor category will even allow you to bring on, because they know they have options. And then I think the other would be, just access to the decision makers like we used to have. They're remote now, and so even sometimes getting a hold of them can be somewhat challenging to get the information that you need. But potentially on some of the opportunities that we're pursuing, but even sometimes even for existing customers, because they have so many demands upon themselves. So it is definitely different, and I think all of us as employers have had to adapt and change to the environment and do the best we can, to be able to do that, and being as flexible as you possibly can be. And I think flexibility has really helped us a little bit.
Yeah, I've found that everything that both Matt and Catherine have said are dead on, and I very quickly will state, it does bring along with it a little bit of scary governance. You now have to worry about where people are when they're performing work, because there are tax restrictions and impact associated with where somebody is actually working. Some folks who take these jobs as completely virtual, you have no idea where they are. Hopefully they're delivering to the best, to the expectations, but you also got IT infrastructure risk associated with, depending on your customer environment and what the expectations are. There, people are using laptops with, and they're on the island of Mykonos, and you have no idea exactly what the risks are associated with access to their devices. So it has created a whole new layer of anxiety for the Catherines, Matts, and I of what you're doing when you're virtually working for us. So yeah, there's some issues that are going to become more standard to address going forward in the new world order.
Well, thanks, Mike. And I could apply to your company so I can work from Mykonos. That would be fantastic. Catherine, sorry, one last word, and I know we need to be wrapping up, but Catherine, you wanted to add one more thing?
No, I was just going to comment on something Mike said. It's not just the employers that are worried about it. Our customers are worried about where the staff is too, right? And it took a lot for them to adjust to teleworking, especially those who were adamant against it even before COVID. just to ensuring that the customers, that we have the mechanisms in place and the oversight in place to ensure them that the work is getting done, even on the island of Mykonos.
There's still this desire or a discomfort when you can't reach out and touch them or see them in an office every day.
See them.
Sure.
And oh, by the way, there's a significant impact to corporate culture as a result of this. We're not touching, we're not connected. We're not going to ball games together. We're not spending the time as much as we used to. So our jobs as CEOs is really to steward that culture. And it becomes even more difficult given the virtual nature of things. And that kind of hurts creating differentiators for mid-sized to small businesses. If you can't have that culture to offer to bidders. So I'm sorry, to employees.
Yeah. And I know we're up on time, and as always, these types of panels go by super quickly because it's such an interesting conversation and dialogue. We could probably go on about virtual work for another hour. I just wanted to thank the panel for joining us today, and obviously for those of you who are in the audience, thank you for joining us. I think the one thing that I would say that I heard from the small business side is that first contract that all of you mentioned that you won started with a relationship. And I think that's a key thing to take away from this is without that relationship, the rest of this stuff doesn't really matter. You really have to have that trust and that relationship to be successful. So thank you all for joining us. I'll just wrap up with just a couple brief words. If you'd like to keep up with things going on with JMU and the Alumni Association or JMU Federal Dukes, there's some links here that you can follow. And of course, we'll be sending an email around following the event with links to the content as well as the recording. And if you want to connect with JMU Federal Dukes, we have a LinkedIn location that you can sign up for. We'll be using that for sharing future programs that we have coming up. We have one on sort of the 101 of doing business in the federal market coming up in the May timeframe. So stay tuned for that. And just encourage you to keep an eye on what we have. We've got a lot of exciting programs that are going to be coming up over the course of the next several months and into the rest of this year. And hope you can join us for those. And again, thank you, panel, for joining us. Matt, Catherine, Mike, really appreciate your expertise and your value today. And thank you all for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
week. Bye.